perspective, can this decision of Biden White House, of Biden administration to allow Ukraine to strike back with US-made weapons influence the policy of future Trump's administration, as you just mentioned about Donald Trump? Because we have heard some plans to freeze this conflict on the current front lines. What is your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we should all be cautious of predicting too much about what President Trump will do. He's his own man. He's demonstrated he could be quite unpredictable. So the reality is, despite lots of proclamations by the people who are going to work with him, until he's in office, I think we don't know. He will, I'm sure, want to bring meaning to what he said in the past about bringing the war to an end. But that need not necessarily be to Ukraine's disadvantage. It may mean, who knows, that actually he doubles down in his support to Ukraine and is more aggressive in his support to Ukraine. So I think, I don't think we should prejudge the outcome, and we should be cautious of paying too much heed to the words he used during the election process and prior to coming into office. So I think it'll be interesting. I think the other thing to say, President Trump likes to show himself as a strong man, and so he will inherit a situation where American weapons are being used on a long-range basis. So will he want to immediately rescind that freedom? I would suspect not. I suspect he does want to appear to be the strong man. He doesn't want to appear weak. He doesn't want to create the conditions where Ukraine are defeated effectively on the battlefield. I just don't think that plays effectively to his wider narrative. So I think, again, I hope we're going to see a more nuanced set of policies out of Trump than some are predicting. We'll see.
So if Donald Trump tries to stop Ukraine for using long-range strike inside Russia, if he reverses Biden's policy and, for example, refuses policy to be in action and does not allow Ukraine to strike inside Russia, this decision would make him more weak on the world stage, more weaker position.
Yeah, that would be my judgment. Who knows how he will view it? But my judgment is that reversing this decision will make him look weak. He does not like to look weak. He has all politicians do, but he's got a hell of an ego, and he won't want to look weak. He won't want to be mocked. He will want, he says he wants to do something really strategic, change the course of this war. I think it will be hard for him to reverse this sort of decision without appearing weak.
How can Donald Trump double down support for Ukraine if he decides to do so? Does the US still have enough leverage on Vladimir Putin? What are his tough options on Vladimir Putin? More strikes inside Russia, even more range deep inside Russia, and other weapons. What are the tough options for Donald Trump in case if he decides to be tough on Vladimir Putin?
Well, let me approach that from a different way. What he won't want to do is to repeat what happened with President Biden at the end of the Afghanistan campaign, where President Biden was made to look weak in the manner in which American forces, and by extension NATO forces, left Afghanistan. It was pretty ignominious. For those of us who served there, it was pretty distasteful. It left Afghans in a very, very difficult position. President Trump will have that memory in his mind, I'm sure. And despite all of his talk of ending the war in a day, he is no fool. And he will be trying to work out ways to bring the war in Ukraine to a rapid conclusion, certainly, but not in a way that makes him look weak and not in a way that undermines American interests. And, for all the talk of making America great again, that isn't done through a wholly independent optic. He knows that America's place in the world matters. He knows that enough of his reputation will need to be based around international affairs, that he has to find a way to precipitate the conclusion of the war. But I don't think that automatically means to Ukraine's disadvantage.
What is your assessment of the possibility of creating a demilitarized zone along the front lines in Ukraine? And what is your take on such idea of freezing this conflict with demilitarized zone and even ground deployment of UK, British, European troops to enforce this demilitarized zone on the ground in Ukraine? What is your take on that? And do you believe that Vladimir Putin will agree with such initiative?
Well, look, the first thing to say is I think, President Putin is almost impossible to negotiate with. You have to be able to negotiate with somebody who negotiates in good faith. No conversation with President Putin can be judged to happening in good faith. So I have concerns about the idea of negotiating with President Putin. I'm also skeptical about the idea of a true demilitarized zone with peacekeepers. So I could, of course, be proved wrong, but I struggle with the idea of peacekeepers coming to the front line. Would Putin ever accept? You mentioned British, French. These are troops from NATO nations. I cannot conceive of that being deemed acceptable, and I think it unlikely that troops from non-NATO regions would come in under a UN umbrella. So I personally have a difficulty with the idea of a true demilitarized zone. I do think some kind of frozen conflict, deeply distasteful though it may be to President Zelensky and indeed to the Ukrainian people, I regret that I do think that is a more likely outcome. And of course, this is something that Ukraine has faced previously after the original invasion by Russia into Ukraine, into Crimea and elsewhere. De facto, as you know, your forces faced a frozen conflict. There was a front line, but there wasn't a lot of movement on that front line. I think it is possible that events on the ground turn into some kind of frozen conflict, and over a longer term that may lead into some kind of UN-led peace process. But I think the idea of a true negotiation with President Trump is a fool's errand.
And from your perspective, how can Ukraine and the West reach at least frozen conflict, at least this type of situation, at the same time when Russia continues to move forward on the east of Ukraine?
Well, this is the challenge, isn't it? Because, again, forgive me, I know you and your listeners know this better than I do, that events on the ground do the talking, and you have to come from a position of strength. So the more sovereign Ukrainian territory that Ukraine is in control of, when, if you like, the shooting stops, the better. And that means that the Ukrainian military has to stem the reverses that they've been suffering in central Ukraine in the first instance. But it also means, for me, that is why the attack into Kursk was so important. I confess I thought far too much of the commentary after Ukraine attacked Kursk was off the mark, and it talked about trying to pull Russian reserves away from the center. For me, it was nothing about that. I feel confident the reason President Zelensky did it and his generals advised it was to create a real strategic, not an operational, but a strategic dilemma to President Putin. By taking control of some sovereign Russian territory, that is a real strategic play because it gives genuine leverage as the war comes towards a conclusion. Because President Putin is a proud man. The Russian people are a proud people, and they will not like the fact that there are Ukrainian troops on Russian soil. That does give Ukraine some bargaining power. And you've got to have some kind of bargaining power because, again, it's events on the ground. There's a reality that is happening in Kursk that Putin will also have to deal with. So it does seem to me that gives Ukraine a stronger position than they would otherwise have.
Would it be difficult for Ukraine to move even more deep inside the Kursk region, or it wouldn't be necessary because it would be better for Ukraine to hold captured terrain and to repel recent Russia's and North Korean attacks inside the Kursk region of Russia?
So if I was, based on what I know, if I was giving advice, I would say you don't need more territory. It's the mere fact that you are holding some Russian territory. It doesn't matter whether you double that in size. I was a great believer that after the original incursion into Kursk, what needed to happen was to secure defensible terrain, whether that's river lines, hill features, but get yourself onto a position that you can then dig in and defend and hold. Now, we know that the Russians have retaken some of that territory. Again, in a way, that doesn't matter. So long as Ukrainian forces can hold enough of what they currently have. I don't judge that they need more. They just need some. It's the mere fact that they are inside Russia. They're holding some Russian terrain. That's the strategic power of it. And as I say, whether that's double the amount of terrain, I don't think that fundamentally changes the calculus. And the idea that Ukrainian forces could now go on another offensive out of their current salient in Kursk, I think is unlikely. So just really hold aggressively what you've got.
Do you believe in any kind of security guarantees from the West in case of a peaceful settlement, in case of a ceasefire, in case of a frozen conflict in Ukraine? Do you believe in such scenario? Because when Ukraine and Russia held peace talks in 2022, Vladimir Putin refused for Ukraine. He refused the idea of Ukraine receiving security guarantees from the West, and according to the New York Times, that was a reason why these peace talks failed, because Russia did not want Ukraine to obtain any kind of serious security guarantees from the West.
I think your characterization is exactly right, but this goes back to what I said earlier. It is almost impossible to negotiate with President Putin. He's a barefaced liar. You cannot negotiate in good faith with leaders who are liars. He only respects strength. Now, I think that early in the conflict, NATO leaders did quite a good job in giving early support to Ukraine and moderating their stance to ensure that the war did not escalate. But quite quickly, it became clear that the Russian military were not capable of really escalating the conflict, and that President Putin was unlikely to do so. And I do think, therefore, that NATO, Western nations, should be bolder in giving genuine guarantees to Ukraine, to President Zelensky, to the people of Ukraine, because you are fighting for yourselves, but you're also fighting for wider Europe. You're fighting for stability and peace in the world, and I think frankly it's the least that the West can do is to give President Zelensky some of those security guarantees.
And my last question for you: do you think that France and the United Kingdom have also allowed Ukraine to strike deep inside Russia with long-range cruise missiles Reuters reported that both French and British governments have not commented on this in this question. What is your reaction to this? How can you assess this?
Yes, I mean, I would expect that Britain and France will wish to provide a similar lift of the restrictions. But in the case of the British weapons, the Storm Shadow, it has American technology within it. And as you know, previously, therefore, Britain has sought the support of the United States before lifting that restriction. One would like to think that if Britain now asks America for permission to lift the restrictions, that America will do so. I'm sure there'll be side discussions during the G20 summit, and I would very much hope that Britain and France will be able, therefore, to make a similar lifting of that restriction.
Thank you, General Jones, for your time and for your support for Ukraine, and glory to Ukraine.
Thank you very much. And as always, Ukraine and all your people are in our thoughts.